The AI agent gold rush is on. Everyone wants one. Businesses are racing to use them, developers are coding furiously, so why aren't they everywhere yet? Well, there's still a gap between the expectation and reality of agents, and unlocking that reality hinges on solving three fundamental challenges: observability, reliability, and performance. And today we're going to discuss all three so that you can deploy your agent to production with confidence. Welcome to episode 39 of Tool Use, the weekly conversation about AI tools and strategies to empower forward-thinking minds, brought to you by Enetic. I'm Mike Bird, and this week we're joined by Josh Purtell, the founder and CEO of Synth, a company that automates the development of state-of-the-art AI agents. Josh, welcome to Tool Use.
It's great to be on.
Absolutely, happy to have you. Would you mind giving us a little bit of your background, how you got into AI?
Yeah, for sure. So I'd say my first exposure to AI was at a cybersecurity startup called Howborn. I was working there because I ended up getting acqui-hired on a small startup that I began with some friends. And there, it was in 2022, we were trying out GPT-3 for vulnerability fuzzing. So what vulnerability fuzzing means is you throw a bunch of potential inputs at a piece of software and you see if you can break it. And before AI, people would use kind of just deterministic methods to generate that data. But you could imagine that if you have an AI, it can kind of get to more interesting inputs that are more likely to break the AI sooner. And I think at that point, we weren't quite ready to, hack into everybody's website with AI. GPT-3 was definitely a beginning point, but it was clear to me that there was a lot of potential working with these systems. And so from there, ended up working at a startup that does a really good job automating accounting with AI. That's called Basis. And in parallel, did a bunch of research with some folks at Stanford, culminating in a paper on optimizing agent prompts. So at that point, I had some academic experience kind of figuring out what works and what doesn't, got the hang of that, and then also a lot of hands-on experience at startups, and really thought the timing was right to just spend the next 10 years of my life working on this problem for everybody, because it's a lot of fun. Who knew?
Absolutely. And it's funny you brought up GPT-3, because I remember there was, I think, a press release from OpenAI saying, this is too dangerous for the public. We cannot release it. And looking back, the output's laughable. But a lot of people are seeing the parallels with agents today, where it's like, oh, you can sometimes book a plane ticket or maybe order your food, but we're just in the very early stages. So what convinced you that agents was what you wanted to put your time and energy into?
Yeah. So I think with agents, there is this kind of irreducible complexity that will only kind of grow. The irreducible complexity is like an agent is doing a lot of things. It's interacting with a lot of tools and an environment out there, and maybe some of those interactions can cause problems or they can actually add a lot of value. There's just a lot going on. And something that I worked on in research is like, okay, you have an AI system that's doing a lot of things. How do you help kind of coordinate all those subcomponents to play along nicely and to kind of get the outcome that you want at the end of the kind of journey? And the cool thing about agents is as AI gets better, that complexity will only grow, right? So if you think about kind of long run, there's certain problems you can work on in AI that will go away eventually, right? That's kind of that people call it the bitter lesson. It's like you focus really hard on kind of making something work with the limitations you have today, and then the better model comes out and all your work is kind of useless, right? That's not really exciting for me. The thing with agents is like as AI gets better, they'll be doing more ambitious projects. They'll be working for longer, maybe for like days at a time. They'll be working in kind of more mission critical settings where they can really screw things up. And so being able to kind of tune them and rein them in, I think only becomes more interesting, more important, and a harder task over time. And that's reassuring, right? It means I'll have something to work on for the next 10 years, and I'm not super worried about all my progress just getting obliterated by GPT-5.
Yeah, totally. The ability to kind of skate where the puck is going and playing ahead is super important, and it's really impactful work. It's not like you're just kind of figuring out a micro optimization of some existing process. It's a whole new paradigm shift. Could you shed some light, just based on your experience, the type of agent use cases you see that actually work right now, or maybe some that are coming up soon that are maybe one or two breakthroughs away from being like economically viable?
Yeah, so in terms of what works now, I would kind of partition it into maybe low value and high value. And I don't mean that kind of with prejudice. Maybe you'll see what I mean. With high value, you have the agent working on some kind of, Claude calls it artifacts, but it's just this thing that it's working on. At every step, it kind of makes a small change or it tests it out. And then at the end of a bunch of steps, it comes back to you and says, here's what I produced. And so really there, it's only tasked with creating this one thing that, it's a difficult task to do that, and has all these resources to help it get there. There's a lot of vertical agent startups, maybe in healthcare or finance or accounting or law that kind of have this setup. And I would call it high value. But the flip side of that is that it's high cost. So it takes a lot of human effort to kind of craft an environment where the agent can succeed at creating this kind of valuable artifact over all those steps. Because there's so many steps, it's really easy for the agent to get derailed, or for it to just create a reasonable plan for creating an artifact, but not the plan that really gets it there. So it's kind of hard for developers to kind of make this setup. And it costs a lot of money just to run the setup once, right? It could cost $1 to $10 per run if you're running Sonnet millions of tokens. It's sort of like $10 per million. And that price point hasn't changed a lot in the last year. The kind of light at the end of the tunnel is that for some of these verticals, producing this artifact can be really worthwhile, especially if the professionals that would counterfactually do it are charging $100 an hour or even more. And so this is kind of one way, like one type of agent form factor that I think has really worked out. And then I would say there's this kind of low value, but then on the flip side, low cost and kind of easier to ship form factor of the agent is watching some set of components, or it has to be responsible for something that the customer cares about, and then something happens, and the agent has to figure out what now, right? So the kind of perfect example of this is maybe an agent that is doing customer support. The agent wants to just maintain a status quo of either every customer is happy, or if they're not happy, there's a ticket that reflects what should be done to make them happy in the future, right? That's the status quo they want to protect. And then a customer comes in, they're like, hey, I'm upset, right? And it's the agent's responsibility to figure out, like, is there a ticket that addresses this? If so, I'll just inform them. Is there not a ticket? Okay, then I need to have a conversation with them to figure out what's the problem. Maybe they're mistaken. Maybe no ticket needs to be written because the code actually covers this. They should just read the docs, right? In that case, they just kind of have the status quo to protect, and they have to figure out what needs to be done to do that. The end result of what they do is like not super complicated. They'll write an email, they'll like write a ticket. You don't need the agent to do that thing. It's usually in one step. What you need the agent for is to review all this context and kind of triage things and think about priorities. And that's often a lot easier. That's more of this kind of horizontal form factor. It probably costs you like 50 cents to $1 per pop, and it's a lot easier to get to market. So you see a lot of smaller startups that aren't kind of vertically focused using this form factor, and it tends to work out.
Yeah, we've had a few people on the show where they talk about viewing the LM as just like a fuzzy function. You don't quite know what's going in, but then based on that, you can kind of piece it into your pipeline so it can get a more deterministic output. On that note, have you noticed people having certain issues or pitfalls when building agents based on either like the high value or low value form factor?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of problems that people can run into. I would say the first few problems, and they're, the first step in making a really great agent system, but they're actually not easy to get right, and they're important to spend some time on, is I would say making sure that you're communicating to your AI what you want. I think people have this idea that, when they talk to ChatGPT, it tends to infer their preferences as an individual, like pretty well. It kind of gets them, maybe in some sense. And so like in an enterprise setting, if I just kind of give it the broad gist of what I want, it'll read my mind and it'll kind of guess how to make all the right trade-offs and kind of all the details and how to dot the I's and cross the T's. But what I tend to see is that that's not really the case, or it will be the case half the time. And then the other half, the agent will make a very reasonable guess that just doesn't happen to match with what you wish for in kind of the inner sanctum of your heart, right? You need to communicate these things and tell the agent what you want. And that can be harder said than done. Easier said than done, because you probably have a lot of requirements and constraints in the software that's surrounding this agent, right? Code needs a lot of constraints, a lot of regularity. If you want the agent to provide it, you have to communicate what you want and what the software system needs.
We've had some guests on that just try to emphasize the LM is a stateless machine, like input, output. And we'll have some people who even, rather than like engage in a chat back and forth and add reply and try to clarify further, all they do is edit the original message, because that's going to be the most likely way to really tweak it to get the proper response from the LLM, and then get that first output be the correct one. And then everyone just mentions, look at your data. Like the best eval is just ask it something, see what comes out, and then try to iterate on there. Have you found going through that process of kind of treating it with like a one in, one out mentality helps at all?
Yeah, so this might get a little abstract, but generally, I like to think of multi-step as either sharing work that needs to be done in kind of multiple steps, or a good match for when you have information to gain. And so if the agent needs to learn something about some external system or even you, the human, and it's great to have that conversation. If you're just trying to refine an output that it could produce in one shot, and that's kind of one single task, then it should be done in one shot. Because one of the kind of iron laws of LLMs is that they don't scale well across context, right? Attention is quadratic. So the longer that context gets with unnecessary information, the less likely it is that it's going to produce the outcome you want.
Yep. And that's actually been, not to derail the conversation too much, but that's been one of the qualms with MCP, where people are like, oh, more servers, more tools thrown at it. And all of a sudden you're really bloating the context window with these things that aren't relevant. So trying to find a tool or a solution to kind of orchestrate and just only give you what you need is kind of like a layer on top. But I digress. Back to, the pitfalls.
Yeah. That's actually essentially the gist of what I would say the second biggest pitfall is, which is they are setting up their agent for failure, right? So on kind of one end of the spectrum, you're giving your agent no information about how to succeed. And then on the other hand, you're dumping a ton of irrelevant information into one LLM call, and that's creating problems for you. So this changes with each model release. But my kind of rule of thumb is that if you're doing something really hard with an agent, you probably don't want to put more than 10,000 tokens of context into the window. And there's some evals out there like MC or RC that kind of capture roughly what that number is, and maybe you can check how new models stack up there. But that's kind of what I found. And what a lot of people do is they'll kind of write an agent harness that provides the agent a reasonable amount of context most of the time. But then, maybe one step in 20 or in half the cases, it'll just dump a ton of context, right? Because there's some edge case they didn't really think about. And now it has like 2 million tokens of things to sift through. And that's going to create a problem for the agent. It's not going to succeed. It's going to derail. And kind of frustratingly, there's really unlikely that a model is going to come out that's going to succeed at 2 million tokens in an agentic task tomorrow. So that probably won't save you. It's unlikely that you're going to like prompt engineer your way out of that. Really, it's that iron law of like these things scale quadratically. You just need to fix your software. The hard thing about that is if your software is injecting all that context 1 in 10 times, it might take more than one try, right? At like just looking at the data, like you said, to figure out where those things are happening, where those problems are coming up. And so often you won't even know. You'll just see that the agent failed, and then you'll kind of ask why.
Yeah, I think we kind of got, not necessarily misled, but the needle in the haystack test showing, oh, it can fill all 200,000 contexts and it still works, really just led us on the wrong direction for expectations around how much we can actually feed in there, especially when you deal with a pipeline, like you said. So do you have any strategies or approaches for helping speed up the debugging process of trying to identify where those bad LM calls happen?
Yeah. So one kind of tool that we use internally that we give our agents is just a verifier or kind of LLM as a judge as a tool, right? That tends to be really helpful. It's just like a first pass. We'll look at first few trajectories that you have, and it's very easy to have an LLM tell you if it looks like there's unnecessary context being provided, right? Or if the LLM is not being given the directions it needs, especially if it's looking at the full context. So that's what we use. But I've actually talked to a lot of agent builders that maybe they're really sophisticated or they like to do things internally, that they've done this same thing. They find a really good way to convert their traces into some clean text format, and then they'll throw into O3 or O1 or what have you. And that really helps them. So I'd say like whether you use a tool or you do it yourself, a lot of people are having LMs kind of give them this first pass on, maybe call it like a eval set of 10 questions. And if you're not screwing up on 10, then that doesn't mean you never screw up, but it probably means you're in a decent place. If your agent is not working, you're going to find out pretty soon.
Yeah. I was talking to some people at Anthropic, and they said about 10 to 15% of startups actually use evals, and the vast majority don't. And it's kind of like going back to the days like, what's your threshold for unit testing? But I think part of the problem is just how intimidating it is to people, being like, oh, I got to set up this big eval suite, go through all these things, implement element as a judge. But really just having something, whether it's basic asserts that do a deterministic test, or being able to pass certain inputs, creating that golden list of prompts with desired outputs just to kind of do a random test is going to be massively helpful, and just getting something in. Have you found it's been, to develop your internal evals, like heavy lifting, or do you think there's been something like an easy win, low-hanging fruit that people can do?
Evals are very important to me, and so I kind of took an approach that definitely involved some heavy lifting, although now it's very nice to have that. If I were making suggestions to somebody who wanted to kind of move a bit quicker, I would ask them to kind of think of like mileposts or kind of mile markers or signposts of success for their agent, maybe just a handful, and just write evals for that, or write some kind of dev setting where you can see what the agent is doing. So I'll be more specific. I was working on this one agent where it was one of those kind of vertical agents. It needed to produce a work product that was really valuable. That was actually kind of hard, and when I first developed the agent, it never produced the right work product, which is actually kind of expected, because it's like there's a lot that goes into the right work product. But what it could do is it could find like the right context for succeeding 30% of the time, right? And then just every once in a while, it would like generate a kind of close enough work product. And so maybe call that like mile marker 1, mile marker 2, and then there's kind of the final destination. That was like just capturing those three. So I had 3 evals. Did it find the right context? Did it get to like a decent starting place? And then did it get the right answer? That was really essential, because it was getting 0 on the final result. And if I made even minor improvements, it probably would stay at 0. I wasn't getting a lot of signal. I wasn't learning what worked. But that first number, if it got the right context, did go up actually quite soon, right? Because it's kind of the first mile marker. So as I made the engine better, I got clear signal. Okay, this is helping, right? And then once that first mile marker saturated, the second one started going up, right? And then at the end, once it always got the first starting place, then I could kind of do that last mile tuning, and the last number started going up. And so is it kind of a pain to like set up those 3 prompts and then, run them over the trajectory? Yeah. But, looking back, if I hadn't done that, I think I probably would have gotten nowhere. And so sometimes it's a question of like, you do what you got to do. Now, to kind of close that thought, or to kind of, add some nuance, would I personally add like 20 different evals? So like, is it like nailing this detail, that detail? I mean, I do, because I have all this infrastructure set up. Would I do it if I didn't have that? No. I would find like really the bare essentials, break it down kind of the way I just described, and stick with that. And as long as they provide you a lot of signal, you don't need more. If you're bad at thinking about the problem and you're bad at setting up those evals, then yeah, you might need 20, because each of them kind of sucks. But if you think through it, I think you can really get a lot with just a few evals.
Yeah, totally agree. Something's better than nothing, and just being able to iteratively go through it is super important. I wonder if we can go a little into detail about that. And I know with the different aspects, there's a different answer, but to move that first mile marker up to get better reliability and performance out of it, did you just do kind of like random changes, some more methodical A/B testing? How can someone kind of like put a process in place to improve a specific eval in let's say the prompting level?
I think that the first 2 problems identified are good to have just visibility on. And so the first step I took in improving that agent I mentioned was I literally just printed what is the like P50 and P90 token count going into the prompts throughout the trajectory. And I kind of just whittled those down. And as I went from like P90 being 40K, which is a lot, to like 8K, the number just steadily went up. And it was a very, very like simple and straightforward, and the progress is very steady. So it's like, why wouldn't I start there? And you could imagine something, maybe it's a little more difficult, but you can imagine just putting a simple Gemini call, just saying like, does it look like I'm asking the LM to do something and I'm not giving it the right directions? Maybe that could be the kind of the second counterpart. Okay, so once those are kind of dialed in and you're getting decent performance, the second thing I did is I would ask an LM, okay, the agent screwed up. You could just copy and paste this into ChatGPT if you want, or you can write software for it. Why? And it would spit out an answer, right? And it would spit out an answer for each of those runs. And then I, as a human, would be like, okay, it looks like half my problems are basically all the same. So let me fix that. And you fix that by just thinking about how your software works and then going to the source and trying prompt changes. And that kind of basic approach, I think, really is kind of the right balance. It does take a little bit of work. You need to get an AI that's going to tell you that 1 sentence summary of what went wrong. But having that perspective on like, here's 20 runs, and here's the thing that actually is screwing me over, here's the thing that's actually giving me trouble. Let me focus on that and just working through that. The high level principle here is that software systems like agents, it's kind of like you have to think about the rate limiting step. There's a lot of ingredients that are going into the recipe. You need good scaffolding. You need good AI, like a strong AI model is strong enough. You need a good prompt. You need all these things. And you shouldn't try to improve all of them at once. You should improve the thing that's holding you back right now. And once you fix that, there'll be another thing that's holding you back, right? So you will solve all the problems, but you do them in the right order. And having the visibility into, okay, this is the problem that is affecting me 50% of the time, it helps you do that prioritization.
Absolutely. You gotta, it's the same rule with entrepreneurship. Find the absolute bottleneck, solve that, and on to the next one.
Yep.
For observability, do you want to share some insight onto how people can get better observability into their flows? Because I imagine a lot of, especially people new to building, there's input, there's output, and then potentially black box in the middle. Maybe they want to try to break it up to get some more points of accessibility to kind of like observe the data. But what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, so I think for agents, the main refinement to kind of the like tried and true open telemetry provider form factor is like make sure that you're seeing what the tools are doing. And kind of to caveat that, or like to even refine it further, sometimes you don't just want to see like what is going into the tool and coming out. If the tool is interfacing with some environment that you've set up or like a bunch of software in your backend, you might want to observe that too. And I haven't seen a lot of like solutions out there, I'm sure they'll come, that help you do that in production. So that might involve, just some simple logging setup. But if you know what's going into the software that your agent is calling, and you know what's coming out, and you know a little bit about what's going on and if that's causing problems, then that with the prompts going into the AI and then the messages coming out, that's probably all you need. And so I think people can kind of get a lot of headway using, maybe you call it Langsmith or Langfuse or kind of these providers, and just getting a sense of what's going on.
There's so many different flavors of tools. It's kind of like whatever people prefer just to get that insight. Pulling it back a little bit, for the initial point you brought up, which I thought was super important, was being able to tell the LM exactly what you want. And there have been people who come on and say they do different strategies for structuring their prompt, whether it's using XML tags in certain ways. Some people say that makes no difference, whatever. Do you go through a process, or is it kind of intuitive now how you can most clearly articulate the objective to the LLM?
The way I prompt is, you'd think, helping out on a paper on prompt optimization, I would like try to optimize every prompt that I write. And what I found is that I just have so many prompts, throughout my software, because we build AI for other people's AI, that it's actually easier to build prompts for humans, for me, right? And actually, it's kind of more likely that I will communicate improperly, that the message will not be sent, than it is for the AI to understand what I'm communicating poorly, right? So it's like usually the error is on the sender side, not on the receiver side. So I'd rather just write a prompt that helps me write really good prompts consistently and maintain them. And the way I do that, and there is some kind of research I think that was guiding my thinking. I'm not going to dump that on you, but hopefully there's some rhyme to the reason. I break it up into here's what you're doing as an AI. Here's kind of premises, ground rules. Here's the setting you're in. Here's what I'm going to name things. Like here's an entity that I'm going to name. Here's the user, and the user is XYZ. And here's me, the designer, whatever, right? Just here's what's going on. I call those premises. Then I outline what I want the agent to do. So those are kind of like goals, right? I want you to do XYZ, and kind of here's what's important to me. Here's my preferences. Here's what I want. And then at the end, there's constraints. Don't do these things, or make sure you follow these rules, right? And you might say like, well, that's kind of like goals, and I just find it to be helpful for me to break up what I want and what I don't want into two categories. And I've just found that breakdown helps me consistently articulate what I want to the model.
Nice. So I've actually done something really similar, which is super reassuring, where I actually have in my app, there's like a templating system where there's a default template with these different areas, and then like an abstracted prompt that has to fill out each variable that gets, compiled into the prompt. How do you manage prompt organization if you have a whole lot? Do you have like a prompts folder with just them, like one per file, or how do you try to structure that?
How I write software for, AI systems it's very modular. So we have this kind of custom language where we put in Python and we put in prompts, and that's really easy for our AI to work with. So our AI can actually write an entire agent end to end in just one shot. It's really hard to do that with just kind of like freewheeling anything goes Python. It's a lot easier if you have a structured format to do this in. So I think it's kind of hard for me to say, because at this point, like a lot of that setup is designed for our AI system. I do like, storing prompts and other artifacts in some kind of like text or YAML format. From my perspective, like the prompt isn't code, and actually the agent code isn't code. They're kind of an AI system that you're iterating on, and you might optimize, and it's kind of like a set of weights. They're there to be changed. But if you only have one or two prompts and you have other priorities as a software engineer, then put it in your Python, and different story. I think I might be an exception.
There we go. Well, it depends on the use case. Depends how complex the system is and what you want to do. The next question I'm going to ask is also very dependent on the system, but when you're doing like a multi-step process, have you found there's either a consistent approach or some situations when doing a complete reset of the context and then giving like a fresh one to the next step? So to better explain it, you get the result from the first LM call, extract one core piece, and instead of putting the whole conversation history into the second call, you just take this piece along with a brand new prompt and kind of like start a fresh conversation.
Yeah, so I'll be honest with you. I don't build a lot personally of the conversation based agents. I have some users that do, and nothing against it. It's just not my preferred approach. My preferred approach is to control the context completely. So kind of what you said, where information goes into a model and then comes out, and then code transforms it and decides what the next call will be. And I know exactly what's going where. And sometimes there's like skip connections where like, step one information about what happened will go to step 3, but not step 2. But all of that is decided by software, not just the conversation history that you have to like compact. I do understand why it's really simple to just write a conversation history because the info is all there. I think it tends to introduce problems to the context. If you don't have control over what info, you have to give it everything, and then degradation.
Do you have any strategies or mitigations against potential malicious prompts coming in? Or even some of your customers or colleagues that do more of the conversational ones?
Like I've seen conversational agents. I haven't seen a lot of people doing like safeguards against some kind of injection. I think there's actually a lot of good like open source research and tools for detecting that sort of thing. And you can use really small models that are really fast for flagging it. And so I'd say if it's a priority, like go look there. But if you're a small startup, it's probably not a priority. And in that case, like it's just not going to be on your radar.
And just being able to do, whether it's an LM as a judge, or one thing I learned is strip emojis, because Pliny the Liberator showed that you can embed some hidden text into the emoji Unicode character. So it's just like little things, just like tidy up your input, just try to keep things safe. One thing that I'm kind of curious about, and this might be more of like a hypothetical, is how do you envision people interacting with agents? The chat interface is getting kind of old. People are saying it's like, the equivalent of like the terminal back in the day. So how do you foresee the interface kind of evolving? over the next couple years?
I think it definitely depends on how you're using this agent. I tend to suspect, we mentioned these two form factors where it's an agent working on something, and then there's an agent kind of responding to some new fact about the world and kind of getting things in order. Tend to suspect that in a lot of cases, people will be interacting with the latter. So there'll be kind of some AI system that is owning some piece of your organization or something important to you as a consumer, and it is not going to be designed for doing a lot of work. It is going to be designed for maintaining that status quo really effectively and drawing on other resources to do any work that needs to be done. And I tend to think that it'll be AI like that will be calling these worker agents, right? So it can get kind of old to call a lot of these agents one by one, right? And I've even found that internally. We have started adopting this form factor where we have like one agent that kind of calls these worker agents, and that agent doesn't do a lot of work. It just kind of manages and triages. And I think in that case, interacting with these systems will be updating the status quo or updating priorities or updating what you want it to achieve when it responds to the inputs, right? And so maybe if you have a software engineering agent interface and all these Claude codes are kind of, but humming away, you'll say, hey, we just did our like sprint planning and here's what we want to get done. There's some question marks for you to fill in. Like, our priorities, our security posture to like make the right trade-offs there. Go for it and come back to me if there's something I need to clarify. It's still text, right? But it's not text that you have to rewrite every day. It's actually something that evolves over time and you have memory and you're not losing progress. And it really becomes a process that isn't this kind of one-off thing in a ChatGPT terminal.
Yeah, no, I'm super excited for it. Along with everything getting intelligence embedded and operating in the background. And to use the code example, code gets pushed up. Part of the PR process could call the doc writing agent that updates the documentation with the changes. And just like a lot happening in the background. We had one guest on, Jake, and he was talking about the idea of having kind of like almost like a Factorio type thing where you have all the little agents operating, kind of get like the 30,000 foot view of it. So I'm super curious how it'll evolve. I'm not a UX guy by any means, but there's a lot of potential just for, we can do generative UI even. Things pop up based on what the context is, and they don't have to always have a text box or always have a graph, but sometimes it's got to show.
Yeah, I'm definitely not design oriented. I don't know what is going to feel the most intuitive for the people using these systems. But what I can feel pretty confident about is that, kind of going back to what I said before, as these systems do more ambitious tasks, they're going to need a lot of information about what their owners want them to do. At some point, we're going to get to a stage where it's just going to be impossible to reiterate all that information in a new chat session. And at that point, I think a really good UX will help the team build up that context over time and reference it and manage it so they can do those really ambitious things.
You mentioned a couple internal systems or internal tools you have, and I think that's going to be one of the bigger proliferations too. What are your views on the build versus buy debate? Do you think people should try to bring in one AI engineer as a new hire and have them start building tooling? Should they just go and buy off the shelf things? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah. So one really fun thing about working in AI is that things move fast, right? The tools that we have today are just so much more powerful than the tools we had months ago. What that means is that providers can move fast too. They can take these new models and package them in effective UIs. But it's my personal belief, and just observation, that it often can take time for a provider to figure out just the right form factor that works for everybody, right? Okay, O3 came out. So what? Like, how do we put this into a product for everybody in the world? It might take months to even just do the discovery to be like, okay, here's how they want it, here's how they want it, let's combine that, so on. If you have one AI engineer internally, he could just figure out how you want to use O3 in a weekend. He doesn't have to balance the whole world of companies kind of competing priorities and yada yada, and he just has to balance your priorities. And he might be able to deliver like the kind of O3 software for you really rapidly because he has O3 helping him. And that might set you 6 or 9 months ahead of where you would be if you were just waiting for the kind of, off the shelf solution, which can be really useful, right? And that dynamic, it might be more important now just because of how much progress can be made over 9 months, right? Like maybe 5 years ago, if you had to wait 9 months for a piece of software, it's like no big deal. But for some people in some contexts, it might matter a lot for them. If you don't care about that, like if something is not a huge priority or you just need something that's good enough, and you can think to yourself like, yeah, if I had to use the solution that would have I could have done myself 9 months ago, if that's good enough for you, then just buy an off-the-shelf solution. In general, right? I think maybe the one caveat I would add to that, right? Because as a vendor, hopefully there's a good reason for people to use me. It is probably going to be hard for an AI engineer to write the software that we've written. So that is probably the biggest counterfactual or counterpoint is if the tool is 10,000 lines of code, DIY is a great solution if it's important to you to be on the bleeding edge. If it's 1 million lines or 500K, you obviously can still do DIY, but maybe at that point the calculus is different.
I really agree with the explanation. I think it's so dependent on the situation. Having a hacker in residence or someone that can spin up an internal tool seems like a no-brainer for me. Anything customer-facing, you need a bit more reliability because we both know you can get to 80% overnight, but to get up to 90, 99, a few nines, it's going to take a lot more effort. And having people, especially a team of smart people, dedicated to a single problem can probably solve it better than someone with the assistance of an AI. But it's really just dependent on the situation and what the expectations are. So I hope more people build their own software. And I think that's the trend we're going towards because, I don't know, you get tools like Slack, everyone just uses it for messaging. But if you got something hyper specific to your use case that's like ingrained in all your products and you don't have to worry about setting up all these integrations, it seems like it'll move a lot faster. One thing I'm curious about is your approach, whether it's any workflows or strategies for when you want to figure out a new feature. So you have a general idea of a product and you want to start expanding it. How do you figure out like what you should add, what's a waste of time, anything like that?
Yeah, so this is kind of what I was saying, where like software has changed a lot, or AI has changed a lot in the last 9 months. My current approach is I work with O3 to find out, kind of what I want to get out of this feature, and then quickly transition to how should this be done. Here's like a bunch of context about my code, both front end, back end, yada yada, and here's kind of a document describing what my company like cares about and whatever. I'm not an expert at every piece of infrastructure, every like database provider or whatever. So I'll come up with a plan that's kind of constrained to what I'm familiar with. But what do you think is the right approach? What's the fastest approach? What like gives me leverage? Are there new tools I should adopt? And what I find is that it tends to do a really good job at giving me something that is kind of the shortest path to getting the outcome. And then I have to like filter out the unnecessary bits because AI tends to be kind of overeager and it'll add things that aren't necessary. But I just find that to be so useful to have this resource. It's almost like an AI consultant that could just tell me how to do things right in areas where it's not my subject matter expertise, and that's been really fun. Yeah,
it's fun having a little brainstorm partner. You mentioned O3. Do you use any other models for certain tasks, or what's your tool belt these days?
For like producing a lot of structured data, I tend to find Sonnet 3.7, which is not a model I love, and a lot of people notice is kind of reward hacky. If it's like max thinking, it's so good at producing structured outputs. And I mentioned, we produce agents in one shot. And so that could be like 30,000 tokens because you have a lot of prompts, you have a lot of code. And it's just incredible to me that like often it can get there for the first pass, right? And then we'll refine it. There's really not many models that could nail that much code in like a custom format. And maybe except for like O4Me. So I'd say those are like really good with working with kind of custom rules and structured outputs. And then for reasoning, Owen Pro, I mean, I can never afford that in the API, but if you use it personally, it's definitely the place to go. And O3 is kind of great for reasoning about how to approach a problem or what have you. In terms of agent harnesses, I still like Sonnet 3.5. When I do fine tuning in RL, it's not on the table. So often I'll do GPT 4.0 or 4.1 now, or some of the open Chinese models that you could do RL and preference tuning on. And those are kind of great in the harness. I haven't tried to build a lot of agents with O4 Mini and O3. It feels like one of those things where like we're almost there. O1 was like unusable in an agent harness, at least for me. O3 feels a lot closer. I wouldn't be surprised if O4 just become that form factor of like RL models just becomes the way you do agents. And everybody uses that approach. But for now, I'm still sticking with Sonnet, still sticking with 4.1, testing out O3. Okay, there's a few other models that I find useful. The Gemini models. I love the Gemini models for long context. I mentioned that like usually you can only give an agent model a small amount of context. The ceiling is just so much higher for Gemini models, and it always has been. I actually have like a benchmark on my GitHub from like a year ago, and they were crushing it then. They're just obliterating everybody on handling long context, and they're crushing it now. I don't know what it is. They have some secret in their post-training recipe, but they're really good at handling a lot of context. They're not good at tool calling, so I don't use them as a main agent. But if I need to process a bunch of information and weed out irrelevant details that the main agent doesn't need, those are the ones I'll use. And there's kind of, you could really go fractal here and kind of think about more detailed capabilities. But I'd say long context Gemini, agents use Sonnet or the GPT models, and then naturally reasoning. O3, O4 Mini feel really good. Forget about one.
And I hope that encourages people to just play more, because you had to go through each one to kind of figure this out. If people have their own custom eval set at home, all the power to them. But even just going through some basic tasks, use a tool like Light LLM to swap out AIs or LLMs really quickly just to see. I think it's super important to do, just so everyone get their own personal preference as to when it works best in certain situations. But that was awesome insight. Really appreciate it. Quick pivot. Could you tell us about Synth? Who should look out to? Who should reach out to you? What services do you provide? Stuff like that.
Yeah. So Synth is designed to help people build better AI agents. I mentioned there's a lot of things that go into making AI agents. And there's kind of this process to improving an AI system. And we can help you at different points in that process. Probably the most accessible product that we have, we called it Cuvier when it first released. I, at this point, call it just our data scientist because the cute name thing kind of wore off. And that's what it is. It's our data scientist. What it does is it reviews what your agent is doing, often in production. But if you're really sensitive about that, you could just do it on like fake eval questions, so that no customer data leaves your secure setup. And in that case, we'll do a lot of the work that I mentioned, where we'll identify like, okay, you're not telling your agent the right information. You're dumping way too much context in your agent. Like the token counts are blowing up in these contexts. And then we'll do the next step, which is here are the patterns. Like here's the biggest problem that you're facing. Let's fix that. And as information comes in, maybe we'll identify new problems that like you expanded to a new customer base and they're really trying to use your agent in a way that you're not designing for. They're getting a bad experience. Some of those problems are subtle. It'd be like, hey, we think that your agent is like not really making the most use of information it gained early on. A lot of the problems are very obvious. So it'll be like the end user, their customer, asked the agent to like give an answer in Spanish. The agent did a bunch of things. The game of telephone didn't work out. The last step, it just didn't. It forgot about the Spanish thing and it gave it in English, right? That's actually hard for an agent to like keep track of all these priorities, but it's super easy for me. I get to see like, here's what the customer asked and here's what the agent, okay, that's obviously a problem. And you might think like, well, I could find that myself, but if you're running 100 agent instances, 1,000, one time 10,000, which almost broke my bank, before we, made it cheaper for us to run this, you can't read 1,000 agent runs, but I can, my AI can. And we can give you that sense of what to prioritize next, right? So that's one system. And then we have a second system, which is like, let's improve your agents. There's a kind of asterisk on this. Okay, so how we can improve everybody's agent is we can go ahead and change your prompts, right, within the scaffolding you have. And we can help you fine-tune the model or RL the model to some extent. Kind of just drop-in replacement. That is really helpful for some people, right? And it's really helpful at certain moments. It does constrain me. So let's say your problem is not that you haven't fine-tuned your model. Your problem is that your scaffolding is horrible and you're dumping tons of context onto your agent. Unfortunately, under those constraints, I can't help you. No matter what I change the prompt to, it's not going to help. And so I would say that those kind of capabilities are really easy for me to give to somebody. And sometimes they really help, and sometimes they don't. Then there's this kind of second or form factor, which is let me iterate on some of those things for you. And I'll find a solution that works. So maybe we'll change the scaffolding. Maybe we'll add a prompt somewhere in the loop. And then we'll come back to you and say, hey, this approach works really well. That's not something that we've found is like really easy to package into a self-serve product. So it's not self-serve. We have been working with quite a few agents companies and getting to self-serve, but it's not quite there yet. That being said, you can make a lot of headway. And there's some pretty crazy performance gains that we've gotten for a few customers. Like just for reference, we had one, they were getting like 70% success on their agentic task with O3. They were getting like 10% with an unfine-tuned model that was like GPT-4o. They fine-tuned it themselves in an okay manner. And I think we're getting like 60%. And when I just added one step and then did fine-tuning the way we're good at fine-tuning at this point, we've been doing it for a while, we got up to 87. Felt really good about that, right? So if you really want really good performance and you're okay to kind of figure out the UX, you can reach out. If you think like your agent is already at 80% and it just needs a little bit of fine-tuning or prompt tuning and you don't want to completely change things, then that's a lot easier for us to kind of give to people.
Josh, this was a blast. Really appreciate you coming on. Before I let you go, anything about the audience to know? How can they keep up with you?
They can follow me on Twitter. I think that's where a lot of AI researchers kind of like to share notes, and I try to do that and try to share updates on the product. Yeah, they should follow me on Twitter, and hopefully we'll be sharing some open source. I would say that's the biggest theme going forward. Want to get back. I've been kind of working in the trenches for a while out of YC, but I worked on the paper with the DSPy folks. We open source that software, something I really love. So hopefully they'll be able to catch me in the GitHub as well.
Oh, I'd love to see it. But thanks for the talk. We'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks, Mike.